The polished marble floor of St. Jude's Cathedral reflected the stained glass light like a mirror of heaven. It was the perfect day, the perfect wedding for Olivia's sister, Grace. As matron of honor, Olivia stood in the narthex, smoothing her silk dress, waiting for the procession. The organ swelled, and the guests hushed. But as the towering oak doors opened for the final time, it wasn't the flower girl who entered. It was her husband, Mark. And he wasn't alone. On his arm was Chloe, the 20-something associate from his firm, the woman whose perfume had haunted their home for months, the woman whose name flashed on his locked phone. Mark smiled, a cruel, confident smirk, and led his mistress right past his wife into the front family pew. The air in St. Jude's was thick with the scent of lilies and old polish, a scent Olivia had always associated with comfort, with Christmas Eve services and childhood milestones. Today it choked her. Her sister Grace was a vision in white lace, her hands trembling slightly as she held her bouquet. "You look perfect, Liv," Grace whispered, adjusting the champagne-colored sash on Olivia's dress. "Is Mark here yet?" Dad was getting worried. Olivia forced a smile that felt like cracking porcelain. "He's on his way." A last-minute crisis at the office. The lie tasted like ash. The crisis had a name, and she was fairly certain it smelled of Chanel No. 5 and entitlement. They had fought the night before, a blistering, circular argument that ended with Mark sleeping in the guest room. He'd sworn he would be there. "For Grace's sake, Liv, don't make this a thing." And now, he was making it the only thing. The organist began the prelude. Olivia's parents, Richard and Eleanor, were already seated in the front pew, the picture of New England dignity. This wedding was as much for them as it was for Grace, a demonstration of their status, their stability, their perfect family. Olivia was the elder daughter, the high school principal, the responsible one. She had married Mark Anderson, a financial consultant with a shark's smile and a portfolio that made her father proud. On paper, they were a power couple. In reality, their marriage was a hollowed-out shell. "Places everyone," the wedding coordinator hissed, her headset crackling. Olivia took her place behind the bridesmaids. The procession began. One by one, the attendants walked, their steps measured to the slow, reverent beat of the music. Finally, it was her turn. She held her small bouquet of white roses, her knuckles pale. She needed to focus on Grace, on the joy of the day. That's when the great doors at the back of the cathedral opened, spilling bright afternoon light onto the stone. A collective sigh and murmur rippled through the pews as guests turned to look. Mark stood silhouetted in the doorway. He was immaculate in his custom Tom Ford suit. But he was not alone. Clinging to his arm was Chloe. Olivia's breath hitched. It wasn't just that he'd brought her. It was the way he'd brought her. Chloe was poured into a tight, sleeveless dress of the brightest crimson. It was a dress designed to be a statement, a declaration of war. Her blonde hair was professionally styled, and she looked around the cathedral not with shame, but with the assessing gaze of a conqueror. Time seemed to slow down. Olivia could feel 200 pairs of eyes pivot from the spectacle at the door to her, the matron of honor, standing alone at the front. She could see her mother, Eleanor, freeze, her gloved hand clutching her pearls. Her father's face turned a dangerous shade of purple. Mark didn't look at Olivia. He scanned the front row, spotted his assigned seat next to Olivia's parents, and began walking down the main aisle. The whispers started, a sibilant rush that followed them like a foul wind. Who is that? With Mark Anderson? Oh my God, that's his wife! Mark and Chloe slid into the front pew, forcing Olivia's parents to physically shuffle aside to make room. Chloe sat down, crossed her legs, and gave Olivia's mother a dazzling, empty smile. The coordinator, oblivious, gave Olivia a sharp nudge. "Go!" Olivia's feet felt like lead, but she moved. She walked down that long, white aisle runner, past her husband and his mistress. She could smell Chloe's perfume as she passed. Mark glanced up, his expression not apologetic, but bored, as if she were the one causing a problem. She reached the altar, her body vibrating with a humiliation so profound it was almost physical. She turned, her back to the congregation, and faced the priest, Father Michael. Father Michael was a kind man, with wispy white hair and eyes that had seen everything. He had baptized Olivia and Grace. He had counseled her parents. He was officiating today as a family friend. As Olivia took her place, she saw his gaze drift to the front pew. He frowned, a deep, puzzled line between his brows. He looked at Mark, then at Chloe, and then back at Mark, his expression unreadable, a flicker of something that looked less like judgment and more like confusion. Then the organ swelled to its crescendo. "Here comes the bride," began. The congregation stood, and Grace, radiant and oblivious, began her walk toward a new life, completely unaware that her sister's life had just publicly imploded. The ceremony was a beautiful lie. Olivia stood beside her sister, a fixed smile painted on her face. Her hands, holding the edge of Grace's veil, were shaking so badly she had to grip the fabric. Every word Father Michael spoke about love, fidelity, and the sanctity of marriage felt like a personal, targeted attack. "Marriage is a sacred covenant," he intoned, his voice warm and resonant. "A holy bond between two souls, entered into with honesty and full commitment, forsaking all others." Olivia risked a glance over her shoulder. Mark was leaning back in the pew, ankle resting on his knee, the picture of casual indifference. Chloe, however, was leaning into him, her crimson-clad shoulder pressed against his suit. She was watching Olivia. A small, triumphant smirk played on her lips. She wanted this. She wanted the public spectacle, the proof that she had won. The whispers continued. Olivia's Aunt Beatrice, 3 rows back, was leaning so far into her cousin's space they were practically sharing a hat. The sound was a low, constant hum beneath the sacred music, the sound of her reputation being shredded. She flashed back to 3 weeks ago. She'd found the receipt. A business dinner at a restaurant she'd never heard of, followed by a charge from the Omni Parker House Hotel in Boston. When she'd confronted him, Mark had unleashed his unique brand of psychological warfare. "You're checking my receipts now, Liv. Is that what we've become?" he'd said, his voice dripping with disappointment. It was a networking event. "We put up the clients from the London office. You're being paranoid, and frankly, it's exhausting." He'd made her feel small. He'd made her apologize. He had gaslit her so effectively that she'd begun to question her own sanity. But seeing Chloe now, in that red dress, in the family pew, the truth was undeniable. The gaslight was extinguished, replaced by the harsh, fluorescent glare of reality. Father Michael's gaze kept drifting back to Mark. It was distracting. The priest knew Mark, of course. He'd attended their wedding 6 years ago, though a different bishop had officiated. But this wasn't mere recognition of a guest. It was a look of deep, profound scrutiny, as if Father Michael were trying to solve a complex puzzle. Mark, for his part, avoided the priest's eyes completely, focusing instead on a loose thread on his suit jacket. "Do you, Liam, take Grace to be your lawfully wedded wife?" "I do." "Do you, Grace, take Liam to be your lawfully wedded husband?" "I do." Grace's voice was bright and clear, full of hope. A tear slipped down Olivia's cheek. Grace saw it and smiled, thinking it was a tear of joy. Olivia smiled back, the most painful lie she had ever told. The vows concluded. "I now pronounce you husband and wife." The cathedral erupted in applause. The organ boomed. Grace and Liam kissed, a perfect cinematic moment. Olivia, as matron of honor, was the first to follow them back down the aisle. She had to walk past them again. This time she didn't look down. She looked right at them. She met Mark's gaze. He looked annoyed, as if her blatant misery was a breach of etiquette. Then she looked at Chloe. The smirk was gone, replaced by a cool, appraising stare. It was the look of a victor inspecting the vanquished. As Olivia passed, she heard Chloe whisper something to Mark, followed by his low, appreciative chuckle. The sound broke something inside her. The humiliation curdled into a cold, hard knot of rage. This was not just an affair. This was a public execution, and it was happening at her sister's wedding. She made it to the vestibule, her breath coming in short, sharp gasps, and waited for the family photos, the next station of her personal cross. The reception was held at the Fairmont Copley Plaza in the grand ballroom. Crystal chandeliers dripped from the ceiling, and the scent of expensive champagne mingled with the towering floral centerpieces. It was the epitome of Boston elegance, a room designed for celebration. For Olivia, it was a gilded cage. Mark and Chloe had arrived before the bridal party, having skipped the receiving line at the church. They had already claimed a bottle of champagne and a table near the dance floor, holding court with some of Mark's younger, sycophantic colleagues, who seemed impressed rather than appalled by his audacity. Olivia, standing between her parents for a photo, felt her mother's hand grip her arm. "You have to do something," Eleanor whispered, her jaw tight, a rictus grin frozen on her face for the photographer. "This is a disgrace. Get him to leave. Get her to leave. Now." "What do you want me to do, Mom?" Olivia whispered back, the camera flash blinding her. "Cause a scene? It's Grace's day." "Grace's day is already ruined," her father, Richard, muttered from her other side. "Everyone is talking. This reflects on all of us. Handle your husband, Olivia. Or I will." The threat was real, but Olivia knew her father's idea of handling it would involve a quiet, red-faced confrontation in a hallway, which Mark would simply brush off. Mark had no respect for her father, only for his money. The bridal party was announced. Grace and Liam entered to a roar of applause, floating on a cloud of newlywed bliss. They went straight into their first dance. As the couple swayed to a soft melody, the guests formed a circle around them. Olivia stood on the edge, clapping along, her heart a cold stone in her chest. Then, from the corner of her eye, she saw movement. Mark stood up. He drained his champagne flute, set it down, and held his hand out to Chloe. He was smiling. Chloe, looking thrilled, took his hand. He led her onto the dance floor. It wasn't a side-of-the-floor shuffle. He led her right next to Grace and Liam. A new wave of shocked silence rolled through the ballroom. The music, a ballad about enduring love, suddenly felt grotesque. Mark pulled Chloe close, his hand splayed possessively on the small of her back, just above the zipper of her crimson dress. Chloe wrapped her arms around his neck, resting her head on his shoulder. They were slow dancing. At her sister's wedding, 6 feet away from the bride and groom. Grace, mid-spin with her new husband, saw them. Her perfect smile faltered. She looked at Mark, then at Chloe, and then, with dawning horror, at Olivia. Her eyes filled with tears. "Liv," she mouthed. Liam, following her gaze, stopped dancing. His face darkened. "What the hell is he doing?" But Olivia was no longer listening. The sight of them, so blatant, so arrogant, so utterly disrespectful, had pushed her past shame, past grief, and into a realm of pure, undiluted fury. The knot of rage inside her snapped. She began to walk. She didn't run. She walked, deliberately, each step a hammer blow on the polished wooden floor. The crowd parted for her. She could feel her parents' eyes on her, her sisters', the entire rooms. She didn't care. She walked straight up to the dancing couple. She didn't tap Mark's shoulder. She grabbed his arm. His muscles tensed. He and Chloe broke apart, startled. Mark looked at her, his eyes flashing with irritation. "Olivia, what the hell? You're making a scene." "I'm making a scene?" Her voice was dangerously quiet, a low vibration that barely carried. "You bring your receptionist to my sister's wedding. You sit her in my mother's pew. You dance with her at the reception. And I'm making a scene?" Chloe laughed. It was a light, tinkling sound that grated on Olivia's nerves. "He's not your husband anymore, honey. He's just been waiting for the right time to tell you. I guess this is it." "You," Olivia said, turning her full attention to the younger woman, "are nothing. You are a cliché in a red dress. This conversation is not for you." "Hey," Mark snapped, stepping in front of Chloe protectively. "Don't you talk to her like that." "Or what, Mark?" Olivia's voice was rising now, gaining strength. "What are you going to do? What's the worst you can do? Humiliate me? You've done that. Embarrass my family? You're doing that. Leave me? Please, I'm begging you." The music had stopped. The DJ, seeing the confrontation, had cut the sound. The only noise in the grand ballroom was the clinking of ice in glasses and the sound of Olivia's heavy breathing. "This is not the time or the place, Olivia," Mark hissed, his face a mask of controlled fury. He was a man who prized control above all else. He had orchestrated this to humiliate her, but he had intended it to be a death by 1,000 cuts, a public display of her powerlessness. He had not anticipated her fighting back. "This is the exact time and place," Olivia retorted, her voice shaking but loud. It carried across the silent room. "You wanted an audience, Mark. You brought one, so let's give them the show you paid for." "She's right, Mark," Chloe purred, stepping out from behind him. She was enjoying this. "Tell her. Tell her it's over. Tell her you love me." Mark looked at Chloe, then back at Olivia. He straightened his suit jacket, assuming the boardroom posture he used when he was about to gut a company. He was done pretending. "She's right," Mark said, his voice cold and devoid of emotion. "It's over, Olivia. It has been for a long time. I'm with Chloe now. I was going to tell you next week, after we got back from the conference in Maui, but you forced my hand." He said it with such casual cruelty that the air was sucked from Olivia's lungs. The conference in Maui. Another lie. How many had there been? "So what?" he continued, gesturing around the opulent room. "What are you going to do? You're not going to get a dime. Our prenup is ironclad. You get the condo. You get your teacher's salary. I get my life back." "A prenup," Olivia whispered, stunned. You planned this." "I plan everything, Liv. You should know that." He turned to Chloe. "See? It's fine. She's just hysterical." "It's not fine," Grace suddenly cried out. She had left her husband on the dance floor and was rushing toward them, her white dress bunched in her fists. "You're a monster, Mark. You did this at my wedding." "Stay out of it, Gracie," Mark said dismissively. "This is adult business." "You want adult business?" Olivia's voice cracked, and then it steadied, hard as steel. "You think this marriage, this life we built, my family, my sister's wedding day, is just a contract you can terminate? You think it's all just a piece of paper?" Mark actually laughed. It was a short, sharp, ugly sound. That's exactly what it is, Olivia. It's a piece of paper, a document, a legal arrangement that has expired, and I am no longer bound by it. The finality of it, the absolute lack of remorse, was staggering. Olivia felt herself untether. The room tilted. Her family was ruined. Her marriage was a sham, and her husband was a sociopath. A piece of paper, she repeated numbly. Mr. Anderson. A new voice cut through the tension. It was deep, calm, and held an authority that silenced the room more effectively than the DJ had. Father Michael was standing just behind Olivia. He must have come over from the head table, where he'd been seated with a great-aunt. His face was no longer puzzled. It was set in lines of grim certainty. "Father," Mark scoffed, not bothering to hide his annoyance, "with all due respect, this is a private family matter. Go back to your dinner." "I'm afraid it's not," Father Michael said, stepping forward. He was not a tall man, but he seemed to tower over Mark. "It stopped being a private matter the moment you decided to publicly humiliate your wife. But more than that, it became my business many years ago." Mark's smug expression faltered. A flicker of genuine unease crossed his face. "I have no idea what you're talking about." "Oh, I think you do," the priest said, his voice quiet, but carrying the weight of the confessional. "And you are quite wrong about your marriage, son. You're right that it's a piece of paper." He paused, and his eyes found Olivia's. They were filled with a terrible pity. "But it's not the piece of paper you have with Olivia that's the problem. It's the piece of paper you have with Sarah." The name hung in the air, heavy and foreign. Sarah. Olivia stared at the priest. Who is Sarah?" Chloe, for the first time, looked utterly lost. "Sarah? Who the hell is Sarah? Is that another one?" She looked at Mark, her voice shrill. "Mark, who is Sarah?" Mark Anderson's face, usually so tan and confident, had gone a waxy, sickly pale. The veins in his neck stood out. "You're senile," he spat at the priest. "You're a senile old fool, and you're lying." "I am many things, Mr. Anderson, but I am not a liar," Father Michael said. His calm was devastating. "And my memory is, unfortunately for you, crystal clear. You may not remember me, but I remember you. You came to my parish, St. Aidan's in Brookline. It was, let me see, 8 years ago. In the fall. 8 years ago." Olivia did the math, her mind racing. She had met Mark 7.5 years ago. They had married 6 years ago. "You came to me for counsel," Father Michael continued, his voice resonating through the silent ballroom. Every guest, every waiter, every member of the band was frozen, listening. "You were a young, ambitious man. You had a problem you needed fixed." "This is slander," Mark said, but his voice was thin. He was looking at the exits, a trapped animal seeking escape. "You told me you had made a mistake," the priest went on, his gaze locked on Mark. "You told me you had gotten married in Las Vegas. A civil ceremony. A stupid mistake, you called it. The young woman's family was very devout, and they were horrified. So to appease them, you'd had the marriage blessed in the church by a priest in Nevada." Olivia's father, Richard, stepped forward. "Michael, what is the meaning of this?" Father Michael held up a hand. "You then told me, Mark, that this woman, her name was Sarah Jensen, was not working out. You said she was emotionally unstable, and that you were on a different path. You wanted to know how to get an annulment. You wanted the church to erase the marriage, as if it had never happened." The blood was pounding in Olivia's ears. She felt lightheaded, grabbing the back of a chair to steady herself. "You're breaking the seal of confession," Mark shouted, a desperate, wild look in his eyes. "No," Father Michael said sternly. "You did not come to me for confession, Mark. You came to me for administrative counsel, and you offered my parish a generous donation of $50,000 if I could expedite the paperwork. You tried to bribe me. That is an encounter one doesn't forget." "My God," Eleanor whispered, her hand over her mouth. "I told you then what I will tell you now," the priest said. "An annulment is not a do-over. It is a declaration that a valid marriage never existed. And yours was valid. You were both consenting adults, you had a civil license, and you had a sacramental blessing. I told you that unless Sarah consented, and there were profound, provable grounds, which you didn't have, the church would not, and could not, grant an annulment. I told you that in the eyes of God, you were a married man." Mark was sweating now, his expensive suit clinging to his back. "We got a divorce, a legal divorce, in Nevada. It was quick." "Ah," Father Michael said, nodding slowly. "But that is where the true sin lies, doesn't it?" The priest turned his sorrowful eyes from Mark to Olivia. "Olivia, my dear girl, when you and Mark came to me for your premarital counseling, I recognized him. I asked him in private if he had resolved his previous marital status. He swore to me that he had. He showed me a document, a divorce decree. He said Sarah had agreed, that it was all finalized. I am a priest, not a forensic investigator. I took him at his word." "What are you saying?" Olivia whispered, though she already knew the answer. The floor was dropping out from beneath her. "I am saying," Father Michael said, his voice cracking with a righteous anger, "that I felt troubled by this scene. So I made a call. To a colleague at the Diocesan Tribunal in Las Vegas, a man I have known for 30 years. He reached into his pocket. He pulled out his simple black smartphone. It turns out there is no record of an annulment for a Mark Anderson and a Sarah Jensen. And when my colleague, Monsignor, got curious, he made a call to the Clark County Courthouse. There is no record of a legal divorce either." The room was so quiet, Olivia could hear the hum of the ice machine from the bar. "The document Mark showed me, it was a forgery." The world went silent. Olivia looked at Mark, truly seeing him for the first time. The charming smile, the confident eyes, the expensive suit. It was all a costume. Underneath was a hollow man, a creature of pure, destructive appetite. "Mark," she said, her voice a thread. "Our marriage?" Father Michael answered for him, his voice gentle. "Olivia, he married you, while he was still married to another woman. Your marriage, in the eyes of the law and of God, is not valid. It never was. Bigamy." The word exploded in her mind. It was a word from scandalous television dramas and old novels, not something that happened in her life, in the Copley Plaza ballroom, in front of her Aunt Beatrice. Chloe was the first one to move. Her reaction was not one of hurt or betrayal. It was pure, unfiltered rage. "A bigamist!" she shrieked, her voice bouncing off the high ceilings. "You're a bigamist!" She turned on Mark and shoved him, hard. "You lied to me. You told me she had all your money, that the prenup protected you. You don't have any money, do you? If this marriage isn't real, she has no claim, but neither do I. You're married to some Sarah. Everything you told me was a lie." She wasn't heartbroken that he loved someone else. She was furious that he wasn't the prize she thought he was. "Chloe, calm down. We can sort this out," Mark stammered, holding his hands up as she began to pummel his chest. "Sort this out? You're a criminal," she screamed. "You let me blow up my life for a man who isn't even available. You're broke. You're worse than broke. You're a fraud." She slapped him. The sound was a sharp crack that echoed through the room. It was so loud, so violent, that it seemed to break the spell. Chloe, breathing hard, her face red and contorted, looked at Olivia. "You can have him," she spat, as if she were discarding trash. She grabbed her clutch purse from the table and, without a backward glance, stormed out of the ballroom, her red dress a retreating streak of shame. Mark stood alone, a red handprint blooming on his cheek. He looked around, his eyes wild. The entire room was staring at him. His colleagues, his friends, Olivia's family. He saw nothing but disgust. He turned to Olivia, his mask of confidence shattering, revealing the desperate, pathetic man beneath. "Liv, Olivia, baby, listen to me. It's a misunderstanding. Sarah, she left me. I thought the divorce was final. The lawyer I hired, he must have messed it up. It's a paperwork error, that's all. We can fix this. We can go to City Hall on Monday. We can make it real." He reached for her. He tried to take her hand. "We love each other, Liv. This is just paper." Olivia looked down at his outstretched hand, the hand that had held hers when they'd bought their first home, the hand she had held in the hospital when her father had his heart scare, the hand that had held Chloe's on the dance floor. She felt nothing. The humiliation was gone. The rage was gone. The love, which she'd clung to for so long, had evaporated. All that was left was a vast, cold emptiness. "Don't you ever," she said, her voice as cold and clear as ice. "Touch me again." She pulled her hand back. Her father, Richard, stepped forward, his face grim. "Liam," he called out to his new son-in-law, "call the police." "What? No," Mark yelped, panicking. "You can't. It's a family matter." "Bigamy is a felony, Mr. Anderson," Richard said, his voice rumbling with quiet power. "You didn't just break my daughter's heart. You committed a serious crime. You defrauded her. You defrauded my family. You defrauded the church." Two of Liam's groomsmen, both large men who worked in construction, moved to stand on either side of Mark. He was trapped. Mark looked at Olivia one last time, his eyes begging. "Olivia, don't let them do this. After everything, please." Olivia looked at this man who had stolen 6 years of her life, who had gaslit her into believing she was the problem, who had brought his mistress to her sister's wedding to destroy her. She thought of the piece of paper he had mocked. "It's just a piece of paper, Mark," she said, repeating his own words. "It's just an arrangement that has expired." She turned her back on him. She walked over to her sister, who was standing by the ruined wedding cake, tears streaming down her face. Olivia wrapped her arms around Grace. "I am so sorry, Grace," she whispered, her own tears finally coming. "I'm so sorry I ruined your wedding." Grace hugged her back, tight. "You didn't ruin it," Grace choked out. "He did, and it's not ruined. It's the beginning, for me and for you." Behind her, Olivia heard Mark begin to shout as the groomsmen took his arms. She heard her father's cold, commanding voice. She heard the distant, approaching wail of sirens. She didn't turn around. She just held on to her sister, and for the first time in 6 years, she felt the possibility of being free. The following months were a legal and emotional hurricane. The Anderson wedding scandal became the talk of their social circle, a sordid story whispered over cocktails and at charity luncheons. Mark Anderson, the brilliant consultant, was revealed to be Mark Anderson, the con artist. The police, prompted by Richard's lawyers, located Sarah Jensen. She was a quiet librarian living in Portland, Oregon. She confirmed everything. She and Mark had married young and foolishly. When he demanded a divorce to pursue his career in Boston, she had refused, clinging to a misguided hope of reconciliation. He had simply left. He'd told her his lawyers would handle it. She had never signed a single document, She had no idea he had married again. Mark was charged with bigamy and multiple counts of fraud, including the falsified divorce decree he'd used for the marriage license and the bank loans he'd secured with Olivia as his wife. For Olivia, the legal process was brutal. Her marriage was declared void ab initio. It had never legally existed. The prenup Mark had been so proud of was meaningless, as it was a contract for a marriage that never was. But this was not the financial windfall one might expect. Because they were never married, the laws of marital property didn't apply. The beautiful brownstone they had shared was in Mark's name alone, purchased with funds from before their sham wedding. Her name was on the mortgage, but not the deed. She was, in the eyes of the law, a long-term tenant. She lost the house. She lost the shared accounts. Mark's assets were frozen, tangled in lawsuits from Sarah, his only legal wife, and the investors he had defrauded. Olivia was left with what she had come in with, her job as a principal, her own small retirement fund, and her dignity. And to her surprise, that was enough. Her parents, humbled by the scandal, surrounded her with a support she hadn't realized she was missing. They had been so impressed by Mark's wealth that they had ignored his character. Now they saw their daughter, strong and resilient, and they were simply proud. Grace and Liam were her rocks. They cancelled their honeymoon. Instead, they helped Olivia move her boxes from the grand brownstone into a new, smaller, sunlit apartment across the river in Cambridge. It was hard. There were nights when Olivia would sit on her new, unfamiliar sofa and just weep, not for Mark, but for the stolen time. For the 6 years she had spent twisting herself into knots to please a ghost, a man who didn't exist. But with every box she unpacked, she felt lighter. She had been living a lie, and the truth, no matter how catastrophic, was a foundation she could build on. The public humiliation at the wedding had been a horrific, necessary surgery, cutting a cancer out of her life in the most public way possible. 1 year later, the crisp October air blew through the open window of a small cafe in Beacon Hill. Olivia sat at a small table, sipping a latte. She was wearing jeans and a simple sweater, and her hair was shorter, a style Mark would have hated. She smiled at the thought. She was meeting someone, a history professor from Tufts whom her friend had set her up with. He was, by all reports, kind and a little nerdy. He was also, demonstrably, single. Her phone buzzed. It was a text from Grace. Photo attached, a smiling, gurgling baby in a knitted blue hat. Underneath, the caption, "Uncle Liam is teaching him about the Red Sox. Send help." Olivia laughed, a real, easy laugh. The bell on the cafe door jingled. A man walked in, looked around, and spotted her. He was a little nerdy. He smiled, a kind, genuine smile, and walked over. "Olivia. David. Hi." She stood up, extending her hand. "It's so great to meet you." As they sat down and began to talk, Olivia looked out the window at the bustling street. The shame of that day at the cathedral felt like a story from another person's life. The red dress, the whispers, the devastating reveal, it was no longer her humiliation, it was her liberation. Father Michael had not just exposed a secret, he had given her back her life, and she was just beginning to live it. The man sitting across from her, David, had a small fleck of foam from his cappuccino on his upper lip. Olivia found herself focusing on it, a tiny, absurd detail in a moment that felt disproportionately heavy. Her first date in 7 years. It felt less like a romantic rendezvous and more like a job interview for which she was wildly unqualified. "So," David said, wiping his mouth with a napkin, mercifully removing the foam, "I have to admit, I Googled you. I hope that's not weird." Olivia's stomach gave a familiar, sickening lurch. The smile she'd been holding felt suddenly brittle. "Oh?" "Yeah," he said, and instead of looking predatory or titillated, he just looked earnest. "My friend, the one who set us up, just said, 'She's a principal in Brookline. You'll love her.' Which, you know, is not a lot to go on. So I looked up your school, and then the other stuff came up." He leaned forward, lowering his voice, though the cafe was bustling. "And I just want to say, I am so incredibly sorry that happened to you. It's monstrous. And I want you to know I'm not here because of that. I'm here because my friend says you're the only person she knows who can quote The West Wing and knows how to properly score a baseball game." Olivia stared at him. She had prepared for this moment. She had practiced speeches in her mirror. One was breezy and dismissive. One was cold and sharp. One was a tearful, vulnerable confession. She hadn't prepared for sincerity. "I can," she said, her voice a little shaky. "And C.J. Craig is my spirit animal." David grinned, a wide, open smile that reached his eyes. "Okay, good. Because I was worried you were going to be all about Rosalind's rules of order. I'm more of a big block of cheese day kind of guy." The tension in her shoulders dissipated, melting away so quickly it almost made her dizzy. They talked for 2 hours. They talked about their jobs, his frustrations with university bureaucracy, her battles for funding for the arts program. They talked about their families. He told her about his overbearing mother, who was a legend in the local theatre scene. She told him about Grace and her new nephew, Leo, and the tiny, perfect way his hand gripped her finger. She didn't talk about Mark. He didn't ask. The scandal was the elephant in the room that he had politely acknowledged, tipped his hat to, and then firmly guided out the door. When they left, the afternoon light was turning golden. "So," he said, rocking back on his heels on the sidewalk, "I'd really like to see you again. Maybe, I don't know, a Red Sox game? We can score it properly." "I'd like that," Olivia said, and the smile this time was real. It was small, but it was hers. She walked home, a warmth spreading through her chest that was entirely unfamiliar. It wasn't the fireworks and obsession Mark had ignited in her all those years ago. That had been a wildfire, a dangerous, consuming blaze built on charm and gasoline. This felt like a hearth. It was just a small, steady glow, but it was warm, and it was real. Life, she was learning, was not about the grand gestures. It was about the small, steady glow. Her professional life had become her anchor. The scandal had, of course, ripped through the school community. The first PTA meeting after the wedding had been a trial by fire. She'd walked into the auditorium, her posture perfect, her suit immaculate, and faced a sea of parents. Some looked at her with pity, others with a lurid curiosity. Mrs. Davenport, a woman who wielded her checkbook like a weapon, had stood up. "Principal Collins," she'd said, her voice dripping with false concern, "given the instability in your personal life and the, well, deception involved, how can we be sure you're exercising sound judgment when it comes to our children?" The room went silent. Olivia had stood at the podium, her hands gripping the wood. The old Olivia would have crumbled. The old Olivia would have placated or cried. The new Olivia had looked her dead in the eye. "Mrs. Davenport, the instability you're referring to was a crime committed against me, not by me. The deception was one I was a victim of, not a perpetrator of. My judgment was sound enough to earn this school its blue ribbon status last year. My judgment is sound enough to have hired the best new math teacher in the state. And my judgment is sound enough to know that my personal life which I have handled with what I believe to be considerable dignity under horrific circumstances, has absolutely no bearing on my ability to run this school. Are there any educational questions?" No one spoke. After a beat, Mr. Henderson, a father in the back, started to clap. Slowly, haltingly, others joined him. The coup was over. From that day on, she was not the scandalized wife. She was, unequivocally, Principal Collins. Her new strength was tempered by a new empathy. She saw the fault lines in other people's lives more clearly now. When a young teacher, Mr. Avery, was struggling, his lesson plans a mess, his temper short, Olivia didn't reprimand him. She called him into her office, closed the door, and just asked, "What's really going on, James?" He'd broken down. His wife had left him. He was alone with 2 small kids. He was drowning. "You're not drowning," Olivia told him, handing him a box of tissues. "You're treading water, and that's okay. We'll get you a life raft." She rearranged his schedule, connected him with the school counselor, for himself, not his students, and quietly organized a meal train among the staff. She had learned that a perfect facade often hid the deepest cracks. That weekend, she was at Grace's house, sprawled on the floor building a wobbly tower of blocks with Leo. Grace sat on the sofa, nursing the baby, a look of profound, exhausted contentment on her face. "So," Grace said, "Mum told me you went on a date." "It wasn't a date," Olivia said, adding a red block. "It was a mutually agreed-upon coffee." "Uh-huh. And is mutually agreed-upon coffee getting a second mutually agreed-upon event?" "Maybe," Olivia smiled, avoiding her sister's gaze. "Good," Grace said softly. "You deserve it, Liv. You deserve simple. You've had enough complicated." "Speaking of complicated," Olivia said, her voice lowering. "Did you hear?" Grace nodded, her expression darkening. "Dad told me. The sentencing." Mark's trial had been swift. Once the bigamy was proven, the fraud charges had stuck to him like glue. His expensive lawyers had tried to paint him as a romantic, a man who loved so deeply he'd bent the rules. The prosecutor, a sharp woman from the DA's office, had painted him as a sociopathic con artist who preyed on women and investors. The judge had agreed with the prosecutor. 5 years in state prison, eligible for parole in 3. "How do you feel?" Grace asked, her voice gentle. Olivia sat back on her heels, thinking. I don't feel joy. I don't feel vindicated. I just feel done. Like the last page of a very long, very bad book has finally been turned. He's not my problem anymore. He's not even a person, really. He's just an event, a thing that happened. What about, Grace gestured vaguely. The money. There is no money, Olivia said flatly. Between what Sarah's lawyers are claiming as the only legal wife and the investors he defrauded, the entire empire was a house of cards. My lawyer was very clear. I walk away with what I came in with, which is fine. I have my job. I have my apartment. She looked at her sister and nephew. I have what matters. A few weeks later, Olivia found herself at the Boston Public Library. The grand vaulted ceilings of the Bates Hall reading room always calmed her. She was researching grant proposals for a new STEM lab. She was deep in a database when the woman at the terminal next to her let out a long, weary sigh. These databases are impossible, aren't they? The woman muttered, more to herself than to anyone. They can be, Olivia agreed, glancing over. The woman was in her late 30s, with plain brown hair pulled back in a simple clip. She wore no makeup, and her clothes, a sensible cardigan and slacks, were functional, not fashionable. But it was her eyes that caught Olivia. They were a soft, hazel brown, and they held a familiar, bone-deep sadness. As Olivia watched, the woman's pen slipped from her grasp and rolled onto the floor. Olivia bent to retrieve it, her hand brushing the woman's as she passed it back. "Oh, thank you so much," the woman said, her voice as soft as her eyes. "I'm all turned around. This city, it's a lot. I'm just here for some legal things. Then I'm back to Portland." The words hit Olivia with the force of a physical blow. Portland. Legal things. She looked at the woman again, really looked at her. The mousy hair, the quiet demeanor, the librarian in Portland. "My God," Olivia whispered, her hand rising to her own throat. "Your name. Is it Sarah?" The woman's head snapped up. Her eyes, no longer just sad, were wide with shock and a sudden, primal fear. How do you know my name? Who are you?" "I'm Olivia," she said, her voice barely audible. "I'm Olivia Collins, the woman he married. In Boston." Sarah Jensen's face went white. The two women, the two wives of Mark Anderson, stared at each other under the watchful green glow of the reading lamps. Here, in this temple of knowledge, was the one person on earth who truly understood the secret, silent wreckage Mark had left behind. Sarah's hands began to shake. I thought. "Let's go somewhere," Olivia said, her voice finding its strength. "Please, let's go to the courtyard." She gathered her things, her hands on autopilot. Sarah, looking dazed, did the same. They walked in silence, two ghosts, through the marble hallways and into the library's stunning central courtyard. They sat on a stone bench, the sound of the fountain filling the air. For a long minute, neither spoke. Sarah was the one who broke the silence. "He told me he was dead." Olivia turned. "What?" Not literally," Sarah whispered, twisting a plain silver ring on her finger. Not a wedding ring, just a simple band. "But when he left, and I wouldn't give him the divorce, he just vanished. He changed his number. His emails bounced. His parents told me he'd moved to Europe and wanted no contact. I just assumed he was gone. A part of me, I think, just filed him away as a mistake, a life that had died. And then a lawyer from your city found me and told me this nightmare. He told me," Olivia said, her voice hollow, "that you were unstable, that you'd had a breakdown and he'd had to get a quick divorce in Nevada to protect himself. He showed me the papers." "The forgery," Sarah said, nodding. "The police showed it to me. It didn't even look like my signature." She looked at Olivia, her eyes finally filling with tears. "He ruined me for a while. I was so young. I thought his charm was... I thought it was light. I didn't realize it was fire. He was a con artist," Olivia said, the word tasting like poison. "He didn't love you, and he didn't love me. He loved the idea of us. He loved what we represented. You were his devout wife, to appease his family. I was his status wife, to build his career. We were just accessories." "That red dress," Sarah said suddenly, a flash of anger in her eyes. "The papers, the blogs, they all talked about the woman in the red dress. Chloe, they hardly mentioned me or you, just him and her." "She was a fool," Olivia said. "She was just like us, only she thought she was in on the con. She didn't realize she was just another Mark." They sat, and for the first time, Olivia shared the whole story. Not the legal, sanitized version, but the raw, emotional truth. The gaslighting, the way he made her feel small, the public humiliation at the wedding. Sarah listened, and in return, she shared her story. The whirlwind romance in college, the quick wedding, the dawning, awful realization that the man she'd married was a hollow shell, all surface and no substance. The years she'd spent rebuilding her life, always feeling like a failure, like she was the one who couldn't hold on to him. It wasn't our fault, Olivia said, and she was saying it to both of them. It was never our fault. He is a black hole. He just consumes. I have to go, Sarah said, finally, looking at her watch. I have a final meeting with my lawyer before I fly home tonight. She stood up, and Olivia stood with her. Awkwardly, the two women looked at each other. They were bound by a trauma that no one else could understand. They were not friends. They would probably never see each other again. But in that courtyard, they were allies. I hope, Sarah started, then stopped. I hope you find happiness, Olivia. You seem strong. So do you, Sarah, Olivia said. You survived him first. That makes you the strongest of all. Sarah gave a small, watery smile. She didn't offer a hug, but she reached out and briefly touched Olivia's arm. Thank you. For this. For not hating me. How could I hate you? Olivia replied. We're the only two people in the world who know the truth. Sarah nodded, then turned and walked away, her sensible shoes clicking on the stone. Olivia watched her go until she disappeared back into the library's shadows. Olivia stepped out of the library into the bright, late afternoon sun. The air felt sharp and clean. She thought of Mark in a cell. She thought of Chloe, wherever she had run to. She thought of Sarah on a plane back to her quiet life. And she thought of David and the text she owed him about the Red Sox game. Her life was not the one she had planned. It was not the perfect, gilded story her parents had wanted for her. It was a messy, complicated, and sometimes painful thing. But it was hers. Every piece of it. The scandal, the job, the new apartment, the hope of a simple baseball game with a kind man. She pulled out her phone, the sunlight flashing on the screen. She didn't feel like a victim. She didn't even feel like a survivor. She just felt like Olivia. And she was, finally, ready to see what came next. She smiled and began to type. The truth, when it finally comes out, is often messier and more painful than the lie we've been living. Olivia's world was shattered in front of everyone she knew, but in those broken pieces, she found her freedom. She walked out of that ballroom not as a humiliated wife, but as a woman who had survived an elaborate deception. Her story is a powerful reminder that the foundations we build our lives on must be real, and that sometimes the most public ending is the catalyst for the most profound new beginning. What did you think of Olivia's story? Have you or anyone you know ever faced a betrayal that was so public? It's a terrifying thought. Let me know your reactions in the comments below. Your stories and insights are what make this community so strong. And if you were moved by this story, please hit that like button. Share it with someone who might need to hear it, and be sure to subscribe for more real-life drama every week. Thank you for listening.